Politihoot! And now, from a lonely little corner of the Bronx.
Is the IDF the world's most moral army?
Absolutely. Hands down.
Okay, I guess there's nothing to worry about. But there's been something that's been bothering me, and maybe you've heard about it, maybe not. We're talking about Section 224 of the 2027 National Defense Authorization Act. Now, I can feel your eyes glazing over already, because nothing sounds less exciting than National Defense Authorization Act. But stick with me, because the government figured out something brilliant a long time ago. If you want people to ignore something important, you don't hide it. You don't classify it. You don't lock it away in a vault. You put it in a voluminous PDF. That's a perfect hiding place because nobody reads those things. Americans would rather read the terms and conditions on their smart toaster. So while everyone was arguing about the $1.15 trillion price tag of this year's defense bill, and by the way, $1 trillion is now a number we say so casually it sounds like we're discussing a Costco receipt, something interesting appeared on this 500-page document. The section called the United States Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, which sounds less like a major policy decision and more like a science project where two honor students build a volcano. But some members of Congress, foreign policy analysts, and advocacy organizations say it deserves a lot more attention. In essence, because it's so long and complicated to explain here, the new dog, take it away.
Section 224 creates a formal U.S. Israel initiative to accelerate joint defense technology development and integration.
And because it's so ponderous, we're giving you a handout of the exact wording for the 2027 NDAA. All you need to do is subscribe to our free Substack using the link below, and you'll get access to the full summary, sources, and bonus material, because maybe this one is complicated. Now, to be clear, the bill does not say, congratulations! America and Israel are now a single giant military fighting machine. What it does propose is expanded cooperation in areas like artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, autonomous systems, advanced weapons development, biotechnology, joint research, joint development, network integration, and something called data fusion, which sounds less like a military program and more like something an airport smoothie bar will try to sell you for $18. Would you like to upgrade to the data fusion? No, I'd rather know what it is first before I put it on my credit card.
Among the bill's many provisions is Section 224, entitled the United States Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative, unquote. The provision would bring the U.S. and Israel into an unprecedented partnership covering technology sharing, the co-production of weapon systems, and bilateral research and development across multiple domains of warfare, including biotechnology, autonomous systems, AI, cyber warfare, and more.
Critics of Section 224 argue that it moves beyond traditional military aid and towards something much deeper: defense industrial integration, and technology integration, shared systems, shared development. And that, my friends, is a debate worth having. Because for decades, the argument was simple. The United States provided military assistance to Israel. We sold weapons. We funded missile defense programs. And people could see this relationship. Congress would vote on it and the public could argue about it. But critics say this is different. They argue that the relationship could shift from writing checks to sharing systems, from foreign aid to deeper technological integration. And the timing is a big part of this story, because this debate is happening while the Israeli government faces some of the most intense international scrutiny in its history. Human rights organizations, United Nations officials, legal scholars, and various governments have accused Israel of grave violations of international law, including allegations of genocide in Gaza. And this is why some opponents of Section 224 find this timing Remarkable. Because their argument is basically, if a government is facing some of the most serious allegations in international law, maybe this is the moment to have a very public debate about deeper military integration. Because if your neighbor is being investigated for setting half the block on fire, maybe don't connect your houses with a shared gas line until the investigation is over. And if you think this is just a fringe argument, this is where it gets weird. Because one of the strangest parts of this entire thing is who's raising the alarm. Khanna and Thomas Massie, which is basically the political equivalent of discovering a vegan and a Texas barbecue pitmaster have started a podcast together. And somehow they agree. Now, if you know anything about Congress, you know that getting Democrats and Republicans to agree on something is already rare. It's like getting two cats to agree on tax policy. They mostly just hiss and knock things off the table. But every now and then, something breaks the normal rules. And this is one of those moments. Because Khanna is a progressive Democrat from California. Thomas Massie is a libertarian Republican from Kentucky who often seems to regard the federal government the way a homeowner regards termites. These men do not agree on much, yet somehow they looked at Section 224 and arrived at the same conclusion. Wait a minute! And honestly, that should get people's attention. Because when Massie and Khanna agree on something, it's like a smoke alarm. It doesn't necessarily mean your house is burning down, but it should suggest you probably unplug the microwave and go see what's happening.
Everyone in America, whether you're a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat, says that we need to tell Netanyahu that America calls the shots, not the prime minister of any other country. They want less cooperation and blank checks to Israel, not more. Only the United States Congress would dream up at this moment, let's actually do more for Israel, not less. And that's what Section 2024 does. It's a pretty simple thing. Should we do more for Israel than we already do? Or should we do less? If you think we should do more for Israel, you should be against my amendment. If you think we should do less for Israel at the time that he's arrogantly telling Donald Trump what to do, then you should be for my amendment. Now, let me just be clear. Mr. Netanyahu actually wrote to a member of Congress to put this Section 224 into the bill.
Now, Khanna's pleas have gone unheard, as both sides of the aisle have turned against it. He does, however, promise to introduce an amendment to revoke Section 224 when the NDAA goes to a full House vote. Meanwhile, this is how Massie's coming at it.
There's a troubling provision in there, Section 224, which I intend to offer an amendment to strip, but that provision would enmesh, synchronize, integrate, whatever word you want to use. I think they use the word synchronize in the legislation, but we all know what it means. And we were called conspiracy theorists last week for saying this means we're going to merge the two militaries, the IDF and the U.S. military, because they said, oh, this is just, we're merely combining our technology and our supply chains and all this other stuff. It has nothing to do with chain of command, which that may be true, but it's still an encumbrance and an entanglement that I think, honestly, is treasonous. There is no reason that this is not a symmetric relationship. Even NATO is asymmetric, but this is way more asymmetric, where we're going to be the ones giving, compromising our own national security, basically obligating ourselves to the defense of Israel at any cost, regardless of what Netanyahu engages in once we, through Section 224 of the NDAA, and then this letter, which is showing you the road, the path that they intend to go down, that makes us all not conspiracy theorists now. It only takes the difference between a conspiracy theory and the truth has been about 6 months here in Washington, D.C. It's now reduced to 6 days in this Israeli plan.
Thomas Massie's entire political philosophy can be summed up in one word. No, that's it. That's the whole TED Talk.
One of the defining features of Massie's career is his consistent opposition to government overreach. He has voiced skepticism about surveillance, environmental regulations, and foreign policy, often standing alone in his votes. His nickname, Mr. No, stems from his frequent dissenting votes.
So when Massie looks at a proposal to create a new structure for U.S. Israel Defense Technology Coordination, his response is pretty predictable. Why? No. But the bigger question both men are asking is actually pretty simple. Why is this necessary? If this is about technology cooperation. We already have technology cooperation. If this is about research, we already have research. And if it's about military partnership, well, we already have military partnership. So what exactly is new here? Because if two members of Congress who usually agree on about as much as a shark and a lifeguard are both pointing at page 224 and saying, hey, just maybe we should talk about this, or at least what it appears to do, which is harder than it should be, because Congress writes legislation the way a medieval alchemist would write spells. Every sentence sounds like it could be either a new government office or accidentally summons a demon. Listen to this. Section 224 would require the Secretary of Defense to designate an executive agent to synchronize cooperative efforts between the United States and Israel. An executive agent. That sounds less like a government position and more like somebody who represents James Bond during contract negotiations.
Hello, I'm your executive agent. I'm here to facilitate synergistic cross-platform geopolitical disruption.
But this would be a real position, a real person, whose job would be to coordinate defense technology cooperation across multiple government agencies. And if your brain just tried to escape through your left ear, I get it. Because governments never hide things in exciting language. They hide them in boring language. And if Congress wanted people to pay attention to this, they'd call it the Future of War Act. Instead, they call it Cooperative Technology Synchronization, which sounds like a PowerPoint presentation that just killed 6 people in the audience. And this is where the bill starts sounding less like a policy document and more like the opening credits of a science fiction disaster movie. Artificial intelligence, cyber warfare, autonomous systems, advanced weapons, biotechnology, directed energy. And at this point, the only thing that is missing is laser dinosaurs. And honestly, give the Pentagon 5 years for that one. Now, to be fair, supporters of this kind of cooperation make a straightforward argument. They say the United States and Israel already work together. They already share research. They already cooperate on military defense. They already develop technology together. So why not expand that relationship into areas that will define future conflicts? But critics say this one is different. They argue it isn't just about sharing a toolbox. It's about building the toolbox together and maybe sharing the garage and maybe giving somebody the keys to our house. That's the concern. And this is where we arrive at the phrase that caused so many people to start scratching their heads. Data fusion. Data fusion sounds harmless, kind of like the term friendly fire. And history has shown us that those words can cause a lot of unnecessary damage. Because in modern warfare, data isn't just information. Data is power. Data is surveillance. Data is targeting. Data is intelligence. Data is decision-making. And data is often the difference between, hey, we know what's happening here, and, oh my God, did we just bomb the wrong building? That is why some analysts look at phrases like data fusion, network integration, joint development, and ask a series of perfectly reasonable questions. How far does this go? Oh, who controls it? Who has access? And who makes the decisions? And who is accountable if something goes wrong? And who provides the oversight? Because you should ask these questions anytime governments acquire new powers, including your own government and, especially your own government. Because the most dangerous words in politics are often, don't worry about the details. That is precisely when you should worry about the details. And that leads to another question critics keep asking. If this is the future of defense cooperation, why specifically Israel? Because the United States has lots of allies. NATO allies, treaty allies, countries that buy American weapons, countries that train alongside American forces, countries that share intelligence, countries that fight alongside the United States. So the question becomes, what makes us different? And what makes this necessary? And if there's a good answer, Congress should be able to give it clearly, publicly, in English without requiring a translator from Lockheed Martin. Because once you start looking at the politics surrounding this thing, the story gets even stranger. It feels like walking into a room and seeing 2 people discussing a wedding. And when you ask, hey, who's getting married? They say, oh, the United States and Israel. And you say, oh, yeah. And they say, yeah. And then you say, when did we discuss this? And they say, Section 224. That's the whole conversation. Not a primetime address, not a national debate, not a months-long congressional spotlight. Section 224, which is a remarkably casual way to handle a question this big. Because whether you support the idea or oppose it, one thing should be very obvious. This matters. And things that matter are supposed to be discussed publicly, in daylight. That's how democracies are supposed to work. You don't make major changes to foreign policy the way people agree to software updates by clicking, I have read and agreed to the terms and conditions. Nobody reads those. That's how half the country accidentally gave their smart toaster access to their personal data. And this is really the heart of the argument. Shouldn't the public know about this? Shouldn't there be a debate? Shouldn't people get a chance to decide whether they support it or not? Because these things aren't just technology. They are policy. They are power. They are strategy. They are choices. And choices are supposed to belong to democracies, not just committees. Which brings us back to the strangest part of this entire story. Khanna, Thomas Massie, a progressive Democrat and a libertarian Republican. Two men who usually agree on about as much as a lion and a poacher. Yet here they are, pointing at the same page, making the same basic argument. Hey, slow this down. And the fact that they are simply making the argument is in itself important because their message isn't really about left versus right or Democrats versus Republicans. It is about transparency. It is about whether the public should know what its government is doing before it does it and exactly who they're doing it with, which is a surprisingly modest request. Yet somehow in modern Washington, it appears revolutionary because history has a funny habit. The big moments don't always look big at the time. They don't always arrive with dramatic music. They don't come with fireworks. They don't announce themselves. They show up as simple paragraphs, as subsections, as boring titles, as language so dry it could dehydrate a camel. And years later, people look back and say, wait, that was in there? Yeah, it was. Right there, in the bill, in Section 224. The page nobody read, the page nobody talked about, which is exactly why it deserves attention. Before the votes, for the press releases, before the official talk reports. Before some future historian appears on PBS with very serious music in the background and says, well, in fairness, the language was publicly available. Of course it was. That's the beauty of it. They didn't hide it. They didn't classify it. They didn't lock it away in a vault. They put it in the one place they knew Americans would never look. So please, do your homework. Use your voice. Pick up your phone and let your congressperson know how you stand on Section 224. Because, baby, it's still our house.
So that's all for us today here at Politihoot. Please leave a like or subscribe to the show or leave a comment below. You can also go to our Facebook page at Politihoot and check into Podline FM. You then can record your own voice and leave your own message that we might play on the show. Love to hear what you think.